Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the third episode of our Spanish Q&A series. My name is David, and I work as a content producer for the Babbel office in New York City. Right now, I'm broadcasting from Tennessee, where I'm spending this quarantine. And I'm joined by my colleague, David, who works in the Berlin office. Hey, David, good to see you.
Hola a todos, soy David, soy de Colombia y vivo y trabajo en Berlín. For those who just started learning Spanish, my name is David, or David, you can also call me David. I come from Colombia, but I live and work in Berlin. And today I'm broadcasting from Bogota, where I'm spending also this time with my family, Colombia, South America. And it's great to be here again. David, great to see you. And here we are to help our Spanish learners. So are we ready for today's topic?
I think so. I'm ready to go. I think it might be helpful if we give a brief recap of what we talked about in the past 2 weeks, because that'll help us lead into our topic for today. And if you remember, if you tuned in last time, or if you're just joining us for the first time, we posted an example sentence for the last episode at the end of our broadcast to encourage you to write in with the answer you thought was correct based on what we had presented in the broadcast itself. So we're going to go over that example sentence right now. But first, let's just go over a brief summary of what we talked about in the first 2 episodes. So if you were here with us or if you weren't, that's okay too. We talked about some of the key ways that learning Spanish is a bit different from just translating one word from English to Spanish. It kind of involves reframing the way that you think about language itself and being willing to see language in a new light. And so some of the examples that we cited were the fact that in Spanish, for example, you don't have to always include subject pronouns like I, you, he, she, it, because the Spanish verb, when you conjugate it or you attach a specific verb ending to it, allows you to capture the pronoun itself without needing to explicitly state it. So that's one example. And we also talked about special constructions like me gusta or IK. So if you want to say I like something, you use the construction me gusta, which doesn't directly translate back to English as I like, but it's a very helpful phrase to know when you're learning Spanish. It comes up all the time. And you use IK to convey that something must be done or something needs to happen. So these are just some Spanish expressions that are really useful and helpful that you can't really link back to English in a one-to-one way, but that you'll just have to use and practice in context. So then, David, do you want to give a recap of the second episode from last week?
Yeah, in the last episode, we were also, we touched the difference between 2 verbs in Spanish, saber and conocer, which both mean to know. So we talked a little bit about when to use saber and when to use conocer. And we even had 3 different questions for our viewers, for our audience, where we asked you to pick the right verb. And the third one was left for today. So today we are going to start with this sentence that we see on the screen. Ellos sé, and we need to fill in the gap with the right verb, which is conocen or saben desde la universidad. So first we should also ask ourselves what the meaning of this sentence is. They know each other since they were both at the university. So what do you think is the right verb here in this gap? So just remember, we have conocen or saben with the right form. You can post your comments. It would be great to see what you think the right answer would be.
Okay, it looks like we have some comments coming in, and I like what I'm seeing so far. Yeah, these are great answers.
That's amazing. You're all right. It's conocen. Ellos se conocen desde la universidad. That's the right answer. And you know what? This is actually a good sentence to start today's topic, because we are going to explain a little bit what that little word after ellos means. Se conocen. So today we are going to talk about reflexive verbs. So first, to recap, what's a verb? A verb, it's an action. In English, they start with to. So we speak about to know, we say to learn, to eat. Those are actions and they are called verbs. And some of those verbs are reflexive. What does a reflexive verb mean, David?
A reflexive verb is kind of just a fancy way of saying that the subject of the verb, or the person or thing that does the action, is doing it to himself, herself, itself, whoever the subject is. So you can do something to yourself, or I can do something to myself. And that's an example of a reflexive verb. And one of the most common examples that you'll see in Spanish of reflexive verbs is the verb llamarse. So if you know the verb llamar, that means to call. And so it's used in the context a lot of calling someone some sort of name. And you can also use it to talk about calling on the telephone, but it comes up a lot when you're learning about introductions in Spanish. Yo me llamo David, or tú te llamas David. So if you want to say, I call myself, you have this construction, me llamo, which actually comes from the verb llamarse, which is what we would call a reflexive verb. So by itself, without the little se at the ending, you just have the verb llamar, to call. But when you add the se at the end to this infinitive, which is the word llamar, kind of the purest form, the unconjugated form of the verb, you get llamarse, to call oneself. So you can see the difference on the screen right here, to call versus to call oneself. And when you conjugate the verb llamarse, as I was saying earlier, you'll get the specific forms that you can use to introduce yourself. So I want to say, I call myself David, so I say, me llamo David. And you notice that we put the yo in parentheses because, as we mentioned in the first episode of this series, you can omit or leave out the subject pronoun as long as you have the verb conjugated in the correct form. So if we conjugate the verb llamar in the form yo, or the first person singular, to refer to I or myself, then it becomes clear that you're talking about I. So you say llamo, and because you want to have the verb be reflexive and refer back to yourself, I call myself, you have the word me in front of the llamo. So it ends up being me llamo David, or yo me llamo David.
Exactly, David. That's right. So in this case, we see two pronouns. What's a pronoun? Again, a pronoun comes in place of a noun. And what's a noun? Noun is every person, every animal, every thing that we can speak of. So those are nouns: the table, the wall, the window, the freedom. And when we use them as subject, and we use pronouns in order to not to repeat this word in the sentence, we kind of take él, ella, tú, yo, as we saw in the first episode. And since the verb has an ending, a special ending for the special person, for the special noun or pronoun, we tend to drop this personal pronoun. So don't get confused. We can drop yo, but in the case of me llamo, we need that little word me in front of llamo. Because as we saw, if we add the reflexive pronoun to this verb, llamar, the meaning changes as well. So in this case, if we are introducing ourselves, it's enough to say, me llamo David, me llamo John, me llamo Carlos. So this is a good example of a reflexive verb. It's worth mentioning that there are many more reflexive verbs in Spanish than in English. So just for you to remember what a reflexive pronoun is, in English, you don't tend to say verbs like I call myself, because you change the structure. And this is also something that we mentioned in the first episode, like how to get used to these differences between both languages. So in Spanish, we do actions that are reflected on on the same subject, on the same person, the same animal. So what if we have a look at the second example that we have today for you, which is a little bit clear, where it's a bit clear what I say here. So let's have a look at this. I wash my hands. In Spanish, you can also say yo lavo mis manos, which would be literally translated word by word, I wash my hands. But it's more common to say yo me lavo las manos. I wash the hands to myself. So this is how we can understand these reflexive actions that are being done by the subject, in this case, you. As for the last example, we can also drop the personal pronoun here and just say me lavo las manos, which is clearly something that we do before getting something to eat.
So if you were curious about the actual verb that you'd have to conjugate to get a sentence like yo me lavo las manos, that verb, I'll type it here, is lavarse. So the verb lavar means to wash, and when you have the se at the end, it means to wash the self or to wash oneself. So then if you take off the se ending and you conjugate for the first person singular form, which is yo or I, then you get the sentence yo me lavo las manos. And one note that I'll make as an English speaker learning Spanish over the past couple years is that this was another element of Spanish that I found kind of tricky because it doesn't have an exact translation back to English. It's one of those many ways that you have to kind of just see language in a new light. Instead of saying, I wash my hands, yo lavo mis manos, which you could say and a Spanish speaker would understand, it's much more common to say, I wash myself the hands, or I wash the hands of myself. If you had to kind of translate it to English, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you translate it to English, but in Spanish, that's the form that it would take, and it makes total sense to a native Spanish speaker like David, for example. Yo me lavo las manos.
Yeah, that's the way we would say it in Spanish. How about having a look at another verb? So, so far we've learned how to introduce ourselves. Me llamo, nos llamamos. But how about saying how you feel? So in Spanish, the verb to feel is also reflexive. In this case, we have the question, ¿tú te sientes cansada? Do you feel tired? I don't know. A friend of mine could say, sí, me siento muy cansada, or me siento bien. So if we are talking about feelings and we want to express how we feel in Spanish, we need also that little word that comes together with the verb. Me siento, te sientes, se siente. And so it goes also to different verbs that we also use in the daily life. In our daily routine, for example, there are verbs that are very useful when we are saying when we are waking up, when we are getting up. So as we can see here, the verb to wake up is despertarse in Spanish. So if we want to say a sentence with this verb, as we can see here, siempre me despierto a las 6. The sentence doesn't have a personal pronoun, an explicit personal pronoun. There is no yo, because it's clear that since I'm using me as a reflexive pronoun and the ending o at the end of the verb despertar, this makes possible to understand the sentence without the yo in front of the reflexive pronoun. So this sentence means I always wake up at 6 a.m.
That's right. So let's move on to another example, which doesn't necessarily work in English, but is perfectly acceptable in Spanish. And that's the verb ducharse, which means to shower. So you can think of it as to shower oneself. And that's just another example how in Spanish you find a lot more of these reflexive verbs than you would in English. In English, you just take a shower, but in Spanish, you shower the self, you shower oneself, you shower yourself. So here's an example sentence. Ella se ducha con agua fría, and that would mean, does she shower with cold water? And here we decided to include the subject pronoun ella, which means she, because when you're conjugating a verb like ducharse in this form, the third person singular form, and you say se ducha, that form applies to more than just one subject pronoun. It can apply to she, ella. It can apply to he, él. So you have to kind of specify here which person you're talking about. Is it she or he? So here we decided to include ella. And the question, ella se ducha con agua fría, means does she shower with cold water? And you could roughly translate it as, does she shower herself with cold water?
Yeah, yeah. So these are the reflexive verbs. We already saw some examples, some different verbs, but the question how to use them or what forms or how to conjugate these verbs might be also show up. And that's why we want to show you how to conjugate these reflexive verbs in Spanish. So if we come back to the verb llamarse, which means to call oneself, let's have a look at the first forms, which are, so we try to build here 3 different groups. These groups are going to be also very useful when we learn also different pronouns like the object or indirect pronouns. So as we can see here, if we say the verb llamarse, we use it with the personal pronoun yo, I, then I would say me llamo. For the personal pronoun tú, it would say te llamas. And the reflexive pronoun for the personal pronoun nosotros or nosotras is nos. So we can say nosotros nos llamamos David, or nos llamamos David. So it's really, really simple. So just remember, yo, me, tú, te, nosotros, nosotras, nos. So the second group is the one for the third person, él, ella, usted, and ellos, ellas, ustedes. We will this group because all these personal pronouns have the same reflexive pronoun, se. But just pay attention to the verb form. If we are speaking of him, her, or you as to address a person in a formal context, we would say llama, él se llama Carlos. But if we are talking about many people, then we would say ellos, ellas se llaman. So pay attention to that N at the end. The reflexive pronoun is exactly the same.
So that actually makes it kind of easy to remember. I think, as I was learning Spanish, I noticed that there are only 4 reflexive pronouns. You have me for the yo form, you have te for the tú form, nos for nosotros, and then se for all the rest. So as long as you can remember which pronouns apply in which cases, you'll actually find it, I think, pretty easy to remember which of the 4 you use in each context. Especially because me, once you use it in phrases like me llamo, it becomes pretty easy to remember, oh, me refers to myself, or te llamas, te refers to you. Nos, I mean, nos even sounds like nosotros, so it's kind of easy to remember that it means ourselves, and then se is just kind of the catch-all for all the rest. So
yes.
Hopefully it won't give you too much trouble.
Yeah. And the third group, and the last one, is it belongs to the forms that we use in Spain. Vosotros, vosotras, os llamáis. This is something that we don't say in Latin America, but if you are learning European Spanish, you might need this reflexive pronoun, os llamáis. So I think this is a nice overview of all the reflexive pronouns that we have in Spanish. Before coming to the questions, we also wanted to show you some verbs that can have a different meaning if they are reflexive or not. So we collected some verbs here. A very important verb in Spanish that can be reflexive or not is the verb dormir. So the verb dormir means to sleep. If we add the reflexive pronoun dormirse, the meaning changes to fall asleep. So I can say the example sentence, duermo 8 horas todos los días, which is great. But if we want to talk specifically about the change of like state of being awake and then falling asleep, then it's only it's easier to do it also with the reflexive pronoun. Me duermo cuando veo películas.
That's a great example. And there are two other examples that we'd like to share. Sometimes examples that trip me up a little bit, because this is a concept that I had to wrap my mind around a little bit when I was learning Spanish. The fact that it's the same root verb, but when you make it reflexive, it actually kind of transforms in meaning. So we can add another example here of the verb quedar. So if you have...
So I think...
So the verb quedar by itself means to meet. And when you add the se to make it reflexive, it means to stay. So if you wanted to say, yo me quedo en casa, that means I stay home or I'm staying home. And there's another verb, volver, which means by itself to come back. Yo vuelvo, I come back, I return, I go back. But volverse, yo me vuelvo, means I become. So these are just a couple examples of verbs that actually change their meanings a little bit when you make them reflexive versus when they're not reflexive.
Yeah, exactly. Those are great examples. And as we could see, the verbs change their meaning if we add the reflexive pronouns. And there are many others where we can add the change, but don't worry, we will also learn how to use them in the proper context. So I think this is a good time also to maybe answer your questions, your comments. Let us know what you think, and yeah, I think we can start answering the comments. I see that there is some confusion between ustedes, vosotros, and even nosotros. This is something that I'm reading here in the comments. So just for you to remember, nosotros, nosotras, both forms mean we in English. And there is a huge difference when saying you in Spanish. This is something that we explained in the first episode. If we want to address a group of people in an informal context, in Spain, they would use vosotros or vosotras, while in Latin America, we would only use ustedes, which is both used for informal and formal contexts. So again, to recap, because I think this was a bit confusing, nosotros means we, and vosotros, vosotras means you, plural, informal, which is used in Spain, and ustedes is used in formal context to address people. Whereas in Latin America, we only use ustedes, only one form to talk with friends, about friends, about you in plural. So it's important to remember this in order to also understand the reflexive pronouns.
Okay, so it looks like we have a question about the reflexive pronouns versus these other pesky little pronouns, which can cause some trouble, le, lo, la. And this question comes from Warren. It's a great question. And this is a topic that we could talk about for a long time if we had extra time to do it. And we'll probably even cover this in a future episode as well. But David, you can help me out here as I try to explain without getting too technical about it. Reflexive pronouns, as we said earlier in this episode, refer back to the self. So if I, as the subject of the verb, do something to myself, that means that I am the agent of a reflexive pronoun. So I call myself, I wash myself, I shower myself. Same thing with you or we. So we do this to ourselves, you do this to yourself. So that's the cases in which you'd use me, te, nos, se, or in Spain you'd use os. But some of these pronouns come back in a different way, and you can use them with lo and la when they're called direct objects. So this means that the subject of the verb, whether it's me, myself, whether it's David, whether it's we or they, the subject does an action or verbs something that's not the subject itself. So if I wanted to say, I eat the apple, and then I wanted to find a way to say, I eat it, then I would end up using what's called a direct object pronoun, la, which is the feminine object pronoun that represents la manzana, the apple. And I would put it in the same position as before the verb as you would have a reflexive pronoun, but it means something other than myself. And it just happens to be that lo and la are two different gendered forms of the same thing, which means it. You can find other object pronouns, los and las, which are the same, but just pluralized versions, so more than one. And then le comes in a kind of different way. And this is an indirect object pronoun, which means that the verb is being done to something or to someone. So you could give a gift to someone, or tell a story to someone, and the to someone or to something gets reduced to the le. So this is kind of a lot to explain in just a short answer, but it's a great question and one that we should definitely explore, that reflexive pronouns refer back to the self, and then lo, la, los, las, and even me, te, nos, which can be confusing, but those can also refer to direct objects of verbs that aren't the subject. And then you get le and lace as indirect objects. So great question. David, fill in any gaps that I missed. Sorry to ramble for so long, but it's a complex question, and I'm trying to give a simple answer to it. So I hope I didn't miss anything.
No, it was great. I think as a learner, it's always also complicated to learn these pronouns in general, since we have also many kinds of pronouns. So today we are talking about reflexive pronouns, which are basically those pronouns that help also actions to kind of return the action back to the person, to the subject that's doing the action. Those are the reflexive pronouns. And then we have direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns. So we decided to start with these reflexive pronouns. We are aware of how difficult it is also for Spanish learners to learn the difference between le, lo, la, and even se, because they refer to the third person. So I think the key aspect here is to understand that the reflexive pronouns are, like these words that are helping us to reflect something on ourselves, on yourself. So this is also the key word: yourself, myself, ourselves, themselves. Whereas le, lo, and la refer to something that is being affected by the action. So as you were saying, if I say, I read the book, leo el libro, then if I use a pronoun to replace el book or to refer to el book, the book in Spanish, I would say lo leo. So I'm not reading myself, I'm reading something different out of the subject. So this is the difference, and we know that this is a difficult topic, and we would like also to prepare a session for you where we explain also these pronouns, because we know they're important, and we can also take some examples for you to understand this topic better.
And I'm posting a really quick summary of what David just said and an example. If you want to say, I read the book, yo leo el libro. And if you wanted to reduce it and say, I read it, it would be yo lo leo. Can be kind of confusing. And of course, like we both said, we will touch on this in the future. But we hope this was helpful for now as a distinction between reflexive pronouns, direct object pronouns, and even more confusingly, indirect object pronouns.
Yeah.
So David, do you want to keep answering questions, or do you want to move on to some example sentences for our viewers?
I think we can answer one question here. Again, Warren. Sorry, everyone. We will also go through your comments, and we will try to answer them via comment, or we can also take this as an inspiration for our next episodes. But just to close this Q&A session, this Q&A part, I think it's important here to mention that there is a difference between a reflexive verb like llamarse or even hablarse, and in this case, se habla español, because in this case, we are talking also about, we are referring to an impersonal pronoun. So this is a resource that we use in Spanish to express an action without saying who is doing what. So se habla español means basically Spanish is spoken here. So in Spanish, we use this personal pronoun, se, just to express that Spanish is being spoken. So this tends to be also translated as using the passive voice in English. Maybe you can say something, David?
Yeah, I think if you ever studied English grammar in grade school, you might have heard this referred to as a passive construction. So in English, an active construction has a clearly defined subject, and the subject does the verb. For example, I speak Spanish. I am the subject, I'm doing the speaking. But a passive construction moves the object of the verb. And this is technical grammar term, so if this isn't interesting to you, or it doesn't make sense, don't worry. But if you say Spanish, which is the object of the verb speak, Spanish is spoken. That's a passive construction because Spanish isn't the subject of the verb, it's actually the object, but you're moving it to the subject position, and you don't actually know who the agent or the doer of the verb of the speaking is. So it lets you get away with expressing that something was done, but you don't really know by whom it was done. In this case, that's called a passive construction, and that exists in Spanish in the example below, as David was explaining. Se habla español. Spanish is spoken. Se come la manzana. The apple is eaten. So you don't have to specify exactly who did it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we should move.
But it's a different function. So
yeah,
it's just a different function of the word se. Se has 7 different functions in Spanish, so don't get confused by that. We learned today the function of the reflexive pronoun, and we will learn more functions also along our way while learning Spanish.
That's right. Okay, let's move on to some example sentences to see how much you've picked up on and retained and learned in this session. You're already really impressing us with the questions you're asking, so I can tell you're paying attention. We're going to give you 2 sentences, one at a time, and you're going to tell us which reflexive pronoun should go in the blank space in the sentence. So
that's right.
The first one is here. Ellos blank despiertan muy tarde los domingos. So we talked about the verb despertarse, which means to wake up. So when you conjugate it for the form ellos, they, which reflexive pronoun form should go in the blank? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of right answers. Yeah, you can type the answer. Okay, David, you ready for the big reveal?
I think it's great to see that many people answered correctly. Ellos se despiertan muy tarde los domingos, which means they wake up very late on Sundays.
So, yeah, if you remember, the reflexive pronoun that gets used with the third person plural form, so ellos, ellas, which means they, or ustedes, which means you all in Latin American Spanish. That reflexive pronoun is se. So the sentence would be, as David said, ellos se despiertan muy tarde los domingos. And that means they wake up very early on Sundays. So good job to everyone who got that right.
It's actually very late on Sundays.
Oh, I'm so yeah,
Muy
yeah,
tarde.
very late. Yeah.
Cool.
Good catch.
So
let's go to the next sentence, shall we?
Yeah. So we have it here on screen. Tú debes lavar las manos antes de comer. So again, you can type the answer in the comment field and let us know what you think the right answer would be.
Wow. A lot of right answers coming in. This is great.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Tú debes lavarte las manos antes de comer.
Good work, everyone.
Yeah. That's great. Tú debes lavarte las manos antes de comer. So we thought this is a special sentence because, as you can see, the reflexive pronoun is attached to the verb, to the main verb, in this case, lavar. So if we go back to the sentence and we have a look at it, we have two options to actually express the same thing. Tú te debes lavar las manos antes de comer, or tú debes lavarte las manos antes de comer. Both are right. So in this case, we have an auxiliary verb, which is debes. So this expresses like a kind of, it is like a recommendation. Debes lavarte you should wash your hands. So in Spanish, we have, in this very special case, the main verb in the basic form, which is lavar. So when we have these cases where the main verb, as it happens here with lavar, is reflexive, we have two options to build a sentence. Tú te debes lavar las manos, or tú debes lavarte las manos. Both are correct. Just remember that we place those reflexive pronouns in front of the verb in the verb form when lavar is conjugated, but in this case, debes is conjugated. So we have this flexibility when placing the reflexive pronoun, either attached to the verb or in front of both verbs.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. I always just have to remember that when you have what are called modal verbs like deber, which means should or ought to or must, or even verbs like poder, which mean can or to be able to, there are a couple examples, and we can talk about them in later episodes too. But these verbs are the ones, like David said, that actually become conjugated according to whatever subject you have. And then you keep the infinitive form or the pure form unconjugated of the verb after. So debes lavar, you should wash, or puedes lavar, you can wash. And then when you want to attach either a reflexive pronoun like te, yourself, or a direct object pronoun, which we were kind of talking about earlier, lo for el coche, you should watch the car, you can choose to put that pronoun either after the infinitive, so debes lavarte, or before the conjugated modal verb, te debes lavar. So these are just it's a very technical explanation for something that is just, I'm trying to explain that it's like a choice in Spanish you can make, and neither choice is wrong. They both mean the same thing.
Yeah. And as many learners are also commenting, it also applies to constructions, special constructions like tener que, which means to have. So tienes que lavarte las manos, or debemos lavarnos las manos. So I think we have a last sentence, but this one is for you for homework. It also has a very similar structure as for the previous one, and I will post it here. We won't talk about this today. This is for the next episode. So try to find the right reflexive pronoun for the next session.
All right. Thank you to everyone who joined us. This was so much fun. We are so impressed with everyone's answers. It's great to see so much engagement. And we're excited to come back next week at the same time for another episode. And we'll actually be doing these broadcasts every single Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time for the whole month of May. So if you didn't get a chance to get your question answered, or you have another question, don't worry, we will be back. Just feel free to comment below with any more questions you have, and we'll either try to come through and answer them on Facebook in the comments, or we will address them in a later episode. We're going to send out a form to you right now in the comments, and that form is a great place to give feedback to us on how helpful this was and give us ideas for topics for next episode as well. I know a lot of people last episode wanted to hear about reflexive pronouns, so we decided to take that and run with it this time. And here is the form for you. It's posting right now. You'll see it. Yep, just posted. And in the meantime, if you want to keep in touch with us on our social media, we're very responsive, and it's a great place to ask questions about Spanish or any other language you're learning. So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Babbel USA. And you're on Facebook right now, so you know where to find us on Facebook, but that's also Babbel USA. And if you've never been to Quora before, or if you know it really well, it's a really great question and answer resource where you can post questions and find out other answers that people have written about language learning in general, Spanish, a lot of really great content on there. And we have a space, it's like a forum or a subreddit on Quora that's called Everything Language, which is a great place to ask questions and to interact with other language learners. So I'll post the link to that here. And then finally, another great resource that we offer for learning about languages and just interacting with more linguistic content, whether it's Spanish or a lot of other languages we offer at Babbel, is Babbel Magazine. So I'll post the link to that here as well. And it's full of great articles and resources for learners of a lot of different languages. Like we said, get in touch with us if you have more questions. We're so happy to see that you tuned in. And we'll be back next Tuesday, a week from now at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So tune in then, and I'll say bye for now. It was really great to talk to all of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and happy learning.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. And yeah, looking forward to next Tuesday.
Bye,
Ciao.
everyone.